All right, guys, so let's try to finish the second half of this chapter of Free to Choose. I think it's chapter 6, right? Yeah, chapter 6, What's Wrong with Our Schools? And this little subchapter, A Voucher Plan for Elementary and Secondary Schooling. This is the second half of that subchapter. So right here we ended. Let us consider briefly some possible problems with the voucher plan and some objections that have been raised to it. So number one, the church-state issue. Number one is the church-state issue. If parents could use their vouchers to pay tuition at parochial schools, would that violate the First Amendment? Whether it does or not, it is desirable to adopt a policy that might strengthen the role of religious institutions in schooling? Or is it desirable to adopt a policy that might strengthen the role of religious institutions in schooling? The Supreme Court has generally ruled against state laws providing assistance to parents who send their children to parochial schools, although it has never had occasion to rule on a full-fledged voucher plan covering both public and non-public schools. However, it might rule on such a plan. It seems clear that the court would accept a plan that excluded church-connected schools but applied to all other private and public schools. Such a restricted plan would be far superior to the present system and might not be much inferior to a wholly unrestricted plan. Schools now connected with churches could qualify by subdividing themselves into two parts. A secular part reorganized as an independent school eligible for vouchers, and a religious part reorganized as an after-school or Sunday activity paid for directly by parents or church funds. The constitutional issue will have to be settled by the courts, remember, because it's separated from church and state, remember, in our Constitution. But it is worth emphasizing that vouchers will go to parents, not to schools. Under the GI Bills, veterans have been free to attend Catholic or other colleges, and so far as we know, no First Amendment issue has ever been raised. Recipients of Social Security and welfare payments are free to buy food at church bazaars and even to contribute to the collection plate from their government subsidies, with no First Amendment question being asked. Indeed, we believe that the penalty that is now imposed on parents who do not send their children to public schools violates the spirit of the First Amendment, whatever lawyers and judges may decide about the letter. Public schools teach religion, too, not a formal theistic religion, but a set of values and beliefs that constitute a religion in all but name. The present arrangements abridge the religious freedom of parents who do not accept the religion taught by the public schools, yet are forced to pay to have their children indoctrinated with it, and to pay still more to have their children escape indoctrination. Yeah, this guy wrote a while ago. So number two, financial cost. A second objection to the voucher plan is that it would raise the total cost to taxpayers of schooling. Because of the cost of vouchers given for roughly 10% of the children who now attend parochial and other private schools. So a second objection to the voucher plan is that it would raise the total cost to taxpayers of schooling, because the cost of vouchers given for the roughly 10% of the children who now attend parochial and other private schools. That is a in quote problem only to those who disregard the present discrimination against parents who send their children to non-public schools. Universal vouchers would end the inequity of using tax funds to school some children but not others. In any event, there was a simple and straightforward solution. Let the amount of the voucher be enough less than the current cost per public school child to keep total public expenditures the same. Let the amount of the voucher be enough less than the current cost per public school child to keep total expenditures the same. The smaller amount spent in a private competitive school would very likely provide a higher quality of schooling than the larger amount now spent in government schools. Witness the drastically lower cost per child in parochial schools. The fact that elite luxury schools charge high tuition is no counter-argument, any more than the $12.25 charged by the 21 Club for its hamburger. 21 in 1979 meant that McDonald's could not sell a hamburger profitably for 45 cents and a Big Mac for $1.05. Big Mac's $20 now, dude. The possibility of fraud, number three. How can one make sure that the voucher is spent for schooling, not diverted to beer for Papa and clothes for Mama? The answer is that the voucher would have to be spent in an approved school or teaching establishment and could be redeemed for cash only by such schools. That would not prevent all fraud, perhaps in the forms of kickbacks to parents, but it should keep fraud to a tolerable level. Number four, the racial issue. Voucher plans were adopted for a time in a number of southern states to avoid integration. They were ruled unconstitutional. Discrimination under a voucher plan can be prevented at least as easily as in public schools by redeeming vouchers only from schools that do not discriminate. A more difficult problem has troubled some students of vouchers. That is the possibility that voluntary choice with vouchers might increase racial and class separation in schools and thus exacerbate racial conflict and foster an increasingly segregated and hierarchical society. We believe that the voucher plan would have precisely the opposite effect. We believe that the voucher plan would have precisely the opposite effect. It would moderate racial conflict and promote a society in which blacks and whites cooperate in joint objectives while respecting each other's separate rights and interests. Much objection to forced integration reflects not racism, but more or less well-founded fears about the physical safety of children and the quality of their schooling. That's true. Integration has been most successful when it has resulted from choice, not coercion. Non-public schools, parochial and other, have often been in the forefront of the move toward integration. Violence of the kind that has been rising in public schools is possible only because the victims are compelled to attend the schools that they do. Give them effective freedom to choose, and students, black and white, poor and rich, north and south, would desert schools that could not maintain order. That's true. Give them a. You're pretty much saying that all that you're pretty much already saying they can't get along. Like, let's see what it does. What it is that people. I don't know. I think it's inherently. I think there's some people at the top that are still racist. I think there's some people that are still racist up there. I don't know. Give them effective freedom to choose, and students, black and white, poor and rich, north and south, would desert schools that cannot maintain order. Discipline is seldom a problem in private schools that train students as radio and television technicians, typists, and secretaries, or for myriad other specialties. Let schools specialize as private schools would, and common interests would overcome bias of color and lead to more integration than now occurs. The integration could be real. The integration would be real, not merely on paper. The voucher scheme would eliminate the forced busing that a large majority of both blacks and whites object to. Busing would occur and might indeed increase, but it would be voluntary, just as the busing of children to music and dance classes is today. The failure of black leaders to espouse vouchers has long puzzled us. Their constituents would benefit most. It would give them control over the schooling of their children, eliminate domination by both the citywide politicians, and even more important, the entrenched educational bureaucracy. Black leaders frequently send their own children to private schools. Why do they not help others do the same? Our tentative answer is that vouchers would also free the black man from domination by his own political leaders, who currently see control over schooling as a source of political patronage and power. However, as the educational opportunities open to the mass of black children have continued to deteriorate, an increasing number of black educators, columnists, and other community leaders have started to support vouchers. The Congress of Racial Equality has made the support of vouchers a major plank in its agenda. Number 5, the economic class issue. The question that has perhaps divided students of vouchers more than any other is their likely effect on the social and economic class structure. Some have argued that the great value of the public school has been as a melting pot in which rich and poor, native and foreign-born, black and white have learned to live together. That image was and is largely true for small communities, but almost entirely false for large cities. There, the public school has fostered residential stratification by tying the kind and cost of schooling to residential location. It is no accident that most of the country's outstanding public schools are in high-income enclaves. Most children will still probably attend a neighborhood elementary school under a voucher plan. Indeed, perhaps more than now, because the plan would end forced busing. However, because the voucher plan would tend to make residential areas more heterogeneous, the local schools serving any community might well be less homogeneous than they are now. Secondary schools would almost surely be less stratified. Schools defined by common interests, one stressing, say, the arts, another the sciences, and other foreign languages, would attract students from a wide variety of residential areas. No doubt self-selection would still leave a large class element in the composition of the student bodies, but that element would be less than it is today. One feature of the voucher plan that has aroused particular concern is the possibility that parents could and would add on to the vouchers. If the voucher were for, say, 1,500, a parent could add another 500 to it and send his child to a school charging 200 or 2,000 tuition. Some fear that result might be even wider differences in educational opportunities that now exist because low-income parents will not add to the amount of the voucher, while middle-income and upper-income parents would supplement it extensively. This fear has led several supporters of the voucher plans to propose that add-ons be prohibited. Coons and Sugarman write that freedom to add on private dollars makes the Friedman model unacceptable to many, including ourselves. Families unable to add extra dollars would patronize those schools that charge no tuition above the voucher, while the wealthier would be free to distribute themselves among the more expensive schools. What is today merely a personal choice of the wealthy, secured entirely with private funds, would become an invidious privilege assisted by government. This offends a fundamental value commitment that any choice plan must secure equal family opportunity to attend any participating school. Even under a choice plan which allowed tuition add-ons, poor families might be better off than they are today. Friedman has argued as much. Nevertheless, however much has improved their education, conscious government finance of economic segregation exceeds our tolerance. If the Friedman scheme were the only politically viable experiment with choice, we would not be enthusiastic. This view seems to us an example of the kind of egalitarianism discussed in the preceding chapter, letting parents spend money on riotous living, but trying to prevent them from spending money on improving the schooling of their children. It is particularly remarkable coming from Coons and Sugarman, who elsewhere say commitment to equality. Let me highlight that. So it is particularly remarkable coming from Coons and Sugarman, who elsewhere say a commitment to equality at the deliberate expense of the development of individual children seems to us the final corruption of whatever is good and the egalitarian instinct. End quote, a sentiment with which we heartily agree. In our judgment, the very poor would benefit the most from the voucher plan. That's true. So they're looking at it from top down. How can one conceivably justify objecting to a plan, however much it improved the education of the poor, in order to avoid government finance of what the authors call economic segregation, even if it could be demonstrated to have that effect? And of course, it cannot be demonstrated to have that effect. On the contrary, we are persuaded on the basis of considerable study that it would have precisely the opposite effect, though we must accompany that statement with the qualification that economic segregation is so vague a term that it is by no means clear what it means. The egalitarian religion, like everything's equal. The egalitarian religion is so strong that some proponents of restricted vouchers are unwilling to approve even experiments with unrestricted vouchers. Yet to our knowledge, none has ever offered anything other than unsupported assertions to support the fear that an unrestricted voucher system would foster economic segregation. This view also seems to us another example of the tendency of intellectuals to denigrate parents who are poor. Like to assume, they're assuming, right? Even the very poorest can and do scrape up a few extra dollars to improve the quality of their children's schooling, although they cannot replace the whole of the present cost of public schooling. We suspect that add-ons would be about as frequent among the poor as among the rest, though perhaps of smaller amounts. As already noted, our own view is that an unrestricted voucher would be the most effective way to reform an educational system that now helps to shape a life of misery, poverty, and crime for many children of the inner city. It's like you're incentivizing them, right? Like you're giving them an extra option to you're giving them extra option to make up their life, like time. We only have so much time in a day. If only so much time in a day, only so much time in a week, only so much time in a week, only so much time in a month. Again, you go for a walk, you might smoke a cigarette, but if you jog, you can't really jog and try to smoke a cigarette at the same time. So which if you're taking up time jogging and exercising, you might spend a little less time eating so much. It's not necessarily, like, you know what I mean? That it would undermine the foundations of much of such economic segregation as exists today. As already noted, our own view is that an unrestricted voucher would be the most effective way to reform an educational system that not helps to shape. Oh, so look, as already noted, our own view is that an unrestricted voucher would be the most effective way to reform an educational system that now helps to shape a life of misery, poverty, and crime for many children of the inner city. that it would undermine the foundations of much of such economic segregation as exists today. We cannot present the full basis for our belief here, but perhaps we can render our view plausible by simply recalling another facet of an earlier judgment. Is there any category of goods and services, other than protection against crime, the availability of which currently differs more widely among economic groups than the quality of schooling? Are the supermarkets available to different economic groups anything like so divergent in quality as the schools? Vouchers would improve the quality of the schooling available to the rich hardly at all, to the middle class moderately, to the lower income class enormously. Surely the benefit to the poor man then compensates for the fact that some rich or middle income parents would avoid paying twice for schooling their children. So number 6, doubt about new schools. Is this not at all a pipe dream? Is this not all a pipe dream? Private schools now are Private schools now are almost all either parochial schools or elite academies. Will the effect of the voucher plan simply be to subsidize these while leaving the bulk of the slum dwellers in inferior public schools? What reason is there to suppose that alternatives will really arise? So he's going to answer these questions. The reason is that a market would develop where it does not exist today. Cities, states, and the federal government today spend close to $100 billion a year on elementary and secondary schools. It's way more than that now. That sum is a third larger than the total amount spent annually in restaurants and bars for food and liquor. The smaller sum surely provides an ample variety of restaurants and bars for people in every class and place. The larger sum, or even a fraction of it, would provide an ample variety of schools. It would open a vast market that could attract many entrants, both from public schools and from other occupations. In the course of talking to various groups about vouchers, where I've been impressed by the number of persons who said something like, I've always wanted to teach or run a school, but I couldn't stand the educational bureaucracy, red tape, and general ossification of the public schools. Under your plan, I'd like to try my hand at starting a school. Many of the new schools would be established by nonprofit groups, others would be established for profit. There is no way of predicting the ultimate composition of the school industry. That would be determined by competition. The one prediction that can be made is that only those schools that satisfy their customers will survive. Kick rocks, my boy. The one prediction that can be made is that only those schools that satisfy their customers will survive, just as only those restaurants and bars that satisfy their customers will survive. Competition would see to that. This fool's fucking lame. Yeah, this fool's really fucking... So number 7, the impact on public schools. So it is essential to separate the rhetoric of the school bureaucracy from the real problems that would be raised. The National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers claim that vouchers would destroy the public school system. Okay. Which according to them has been the foundation and cornerstone of our democracy. Their claims are never accompanied by any evidence that the public school system today achieves the results claimed for it. Whatever may have been true in earlier times, nor do the spokesmen for these organizations ever explain why. If the public school system is doing such a splendid job, it needs to fear competition from non-governmental, competitive schools, or if it isn't, why anyone should object to its destruction. The threat to public schools arises from their defects, not their accomplishments. In small, closely knit communities where public schools, particularly elementary schools, are now reasonably satisfactory, not even the most comprehensive voucher plan would have much effect. The public schools would remain dominant, perhaps somewhat improved by the threat of potential competition, but elsewhere, and particularly in the urban slums where the public schools are doing such a poor job, most parents would undoubtedly try to send their children to non-public schools. That would raise some transitional difficulties. The parents who are most concerned about their children's welfare are likely to be the first to transfer their children. Even if the children are no smarter than those who remain, they will be more highly motivated to learn and will have more favorable home backgrounds. The possibility exists that some public schools will be left with the dregs, the unfortunate ones, becoming even poorer in quality than they are now. As the private market took over, the quality of all schooling would rise so much that even the worst, while it might be relatively lower on the scale, would be better in absolute quality. And as Harlem Prep and similar experiments have demonstrated, many pupils who are among the dregs would perform well in schools that evoke their enthusiasm instead of hostility or apathy. Like apathetic, like and don't care. They're just at school like zombies. Like I'm only here because I have to be. As Adam Smith put it in 2 centuries ago. So no discipline is ever requisite to force attendance upon lectures which are really worth the attending. So no discipline is ever requisite to force attendance upon lectures which are so. Yeah, you get it. So force and restraint may, no doubt, be in some degree requisite in order to oblige children to attend to those parts of education which is thought necessary for them to acquire during that early period of life. But after 12 or 13 years of age, provided the master does his duty, force or restraint can scarce ever be necessary to carry on any part of education. So by that time, he's saying they will enjoy. They will just, yeah, you wouldn't have to coerce them to be in there. So those parts of education it is to be observed, for the teaching of which there are no public institutions, are generally the best taught. Yeah. So my favorite one here so far is the one prediction that can be made is that only those schools that satisfy their customers will survive, just as only those restaurants and bars that satisfy their customers survive. Competition would see to that. I mean, that's the most healthiest way of a free economy. So it's the only healthiest way. Fools are annoying.